one of the reasons why we design all our clubs differently is hopefully that they continue to kind of surprise and delight the customer. It extends our brand's sort of longevity, if you like, and hopefully we're not something that's cool at a moment, but then becomes out of fashion. It might be more sustained that way.
Welcome to this week's Escapionomics podcast. Our guest today is a trailblazing entrepreneur responsible for launching the UK's boutique fitness revolution. Having created one of the most iconic fitness brands in the world, operating 11 London studios and with outposts in Australia, Saudi Arabia and Israel, everything looked rosy and set for world domination. Then commercial tragedy struck. COVID swept around the world, closing businesses and forcing people to stay at home. Fortunately, due to the optimism of our guest, investor confidence in the brand, and an agile business model, the brand has been able to recover relatively quickly, looking to be free of landlord legacy debt by 2026. Despite the brand's resilience, the journey has not been without its challenges.
You want to be sort of stubborn on the goal and flexible on the tactics. Just because you put 4 walls and some equipment inside doesn't make you a boutique studio. We're not departing from our values, but at the same time, I don't think our values need to be shoved down people's throats at every opportunity.
It gives me great pleasure to welcome Mr. James Balfour, founder of 1Rebel, to today's podcast.
6 years ago, I think you were my first guest.
Yeah, and things have gone uphill ever since, so yeah, it's good to be back.
So how have things gone since then?
Oh gosh. 6 years in a quick answer. Well, when we met, I think we had 2 clubs, I think. We now have 11 in central London, a flagship in Dubai and 2 in Melbourne, and then a small franchise business in the Middle East. And that tells a nice sort of trajectory and story, obviously, but I mean, like, I think for probably almost everyone you've had on this podcast or anyone who's listening, 3 years of COVID was you know, as painful as you can probably imagine. So, you know, a nice story from 2 to 11 plus, but with a little interlude of a once in 100-year catastrophe.
Yeah. What was that vision like at the beginning compared to what it is now based on what happened in the middle? Because there was a number of things that you guys were doing at the beginning. You're a real disruptor. You'd changed things like membership models, and I guess the first real boutique, high-end boutique in London with my guess is a very clear vision about how you were going to disrupt the industry. Like, is that still, do you still feel the same way about things, or is it?
Well, I was just thinking, was it the Mike Tyson quote, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face? And I think everyone got a big punch in the face 3 years ago. I think you want to be sort of stubborn on the goal and flexible on the tactics. And we knew that there were some things that needed to be disrupted, but at the same time, I think you can't be too wedged to any particular principle when the facts change. So if you look at our business when we first met, I think we were essentially 100% on packages and pay-as-you-go. Now that's more like 25% of our business. The rest is on memberships or an aggregator like ClassPass. So we've pivoted from all our rhetoric about being anti-membership from the start. And really a lot of that was in response essentially to COVID. I mean, if you think about those businesses who had reoccurring sort of, you know, contractual memberships, they were able to withstand the interruption in business a lot better than those that were just on pay-as-you-go. But moreover, it was really last year where you were coming out of COVID, but the work from home mandate was still there until January 24th, which was really cut into the fitness industry's Q1. But then it was then followed by a number of tube strikes, train strikes, you know, extra bank holidays, the Queen sadly passing. You know, there was disruption over disruption over disruption, and fitness remains a habitual thing. And if you don't have that income when habits sort of fall, you can obviously be affected as a business. So we really pivoted towards looking back towards memberships, and that's actually gone really well. I think also in terms of the vision, you know, we wanted to be sort of the premium boutique offering, but I think during COVID, there were some changes where we thought, okay, do we have to go a little bit more low cost and local? And we did a club in Hammersmith, which was on a smaller footprint to try and sort of react to the work from home kind of a trend. But I think that was a departure too far for us. You know, where we are more premium, where we are bigger, where we can make more of an impact architecturally and and experience-wise, on the experience category, if you like, we do better as well.
How, with the pay-as-you-go model, like I remember at the time you telling me about pitching this to the investors, and people were naturally concerned about that. What was the original intent for doing that, and how do you balance that now? Because I suppose from any business, if you've got that predictable income, and if you can find something where you can get that, it's great. But how did you look at that at the time, and why did you feel sort of very strongly about not going down that road originally?
Well, I don't buy into the investor complaints about pay-as-you-go versus membership income, simply being because if you look outside of the fitness industry, what other businesses have that membership income? I mean, hairdressers, airlines, bars, none of them are relying on membership income. But because our sort of forefathers, if you like, in the industry, had 12-month contracts, that became an attractive thing for the fitness industry. But I think what we wanted to do was buck the trend, because we believed at the time, and this now is going back quite some time, a lot of the fitness operators were still putting people into 12-month contracts as your only option. And so we felt that customers, if I think about most of the contracts I'm in, it's like with energy providers, telecoms, I'm not particularly happy about any of those relationships. So by putting the power back into the customers, by doing pay-as-you-go, we felt that was more applicable to the way especially millennials were consuming, but also it redressed the balance between us and the consumer. If you go to a nice restaurant and it's a bad meal, you're not going to come again. So I felt it held us to account in a way that was going to be better if we had to work harder for that custom. I think what's then changed over those years is most operators have dropped the contractual terms. We have now all of the ranges basically for customers. If they want to do a minimum commitment of just a couple of months, or a longer commitment of 12 months, but also on a pay-as-you-go format, and also coming through an aggregator. So I think what we have now is the most choice for the consumer, and it's up to us to really price those to kind of work in tandem for us and our investors, as well as the consumers at the same time. So I think ultimately choice is a really good thing, and then it's down to you to try and funnel those choices into what's best for the business and the long-term success.
How would you describe the boutique fitness market now? When you started back sort of 6 or 7 years ago, it was really a new thing, and you guys came setting the bar extremely high from an experience perspective. I remember the first location that you had, it was just fabulous. And then certainly in London, hundreds of boutiques came and went. How have you seen that journey, and where would you say it is today based on kind of how it started out?
Yeah, I think Soul Cycle and Barry's Bootcamp sort of 10 years ago created a bit of a gold rush for this. Which I don't think has been a bad thing. I think it's allowed people to take part in that market, and some do very well, some do less well. I think the overall lesson over the last however many years is that you just because you put 4 walls and some equipment inside doesn't make you a boutique studio. There has been over time, and will continue, in my view, be a flight to quality, because obviously your competitors always have a say in the matter, and the big boxes started to react as well. So they started upping their game in a studio offering, and essentially my view is you've got to bring something to a 4-wall studio that your big box operators are unlikely to do, and that might be through the programming, or it might be through the entertainment, the lighting, the sound, all that sort of stuff. But I think there has been a consistent flight to quality, and we have to continue to premiumize as a business. And I think the ones that are reluctant to do that or haven't done that will find it more difficult when it comes to maintaining their price point, which is so critical, especially in central London, when you have extortionate rents and high cost base. So the model, I think, has come into question when it's come under pressure, both from competitors but external forces like COVID. And I think for investors that has spooked some, because there have been some models which are hard to, I think, justify. But we feel pretty confident now in what we believe the model is. But you asked me sort of how does my vision compare to when we last spoke. I mean, I remember meeting someone at the time who said it's always your third unit that is more likely to model. You're always kind of making it up as you go along a little bit at the start. And we've experimented in lots of different, 1 studio, 2 studio, 3 studio clubs, different concepts. But I think we're channeling that now into more complete vision.
When you mentioned earlier that it was the bigger types of more grander locations that do a lot better. What do you think is that it makes that work? Is it because you've got more than one studio to draw people in, so it's kind of not just a single modality boutique, or do you think it's the experience or a number of things put together?
Yeah, I think financially the model is basically it's a leveraged one where you put on a number of classes and then you look at how many positions can you get with how many classes you can do over a day. So the more popular the class, the more classes you can have, the more positions you can have. But then there's also diminishing returns on positions. So like reformer, for example, you couldn't have an 80-person reformer room, but you could do that for a ride where it's more of a fun experience. So you've got to tweak your model in that sense to get the right returns. But equally, the more studios that you have, the more pressure you have on your changing rooms. So there's all these constraints and levers in the model. We think going forward it's a 2 to 3 studio model of between overall, let's say 60 and 100 positions in the club, anything between 7,500 and 10,000 square foot. And I think our real focus is going forward the concepts like ride, reform, and reshape. That's where we see sort of the most surprise and delight and traction from our customers. So I think we now know more than ever who we are and what we're going to be. But I don't also think anyone should be disheartened if they don't know sort of what they are. Business is trial and error. Hopefully you have people who are going to support that trial and error and not lose faith in you. But there's no one who ever knows it straight away. I mean, that's very lucky if that's the case.
The wait is over. Our new Escape Fitness catalogue has landed. This is the essential guide to all of the latest product innovations that are shaping the future of functional training. Bigger and better than ever, this year's catalogue is 190 pages, jam-packed with everything from eye-catching, bespoke functional training frames to some of the latest strength training equipment. So sign up today to receive the digital version today, or be one of the lucky few to receive a hardbound printed copy straight to your door. So what are you waiting for? Go to escapefitness.com now.
You've got Ride, and we've seen what's happened with the Soul Cycles and then the Pelotons. How do you feel now about that? Do you feel the reason that some of these models have not sustained is because they're just one program on their own without everything else, or do you think it's how to deliver it is the success factor? Because it certainly seems when you look at there was almost like an oversupply of cycle-based studios, and many of them are not around anymore, but you guys are still including it.
Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of people from the outside, a studio business might seem easy. It's not. I mean, there's so many customer touch points from when you come in through our doors to when you leave, that if one of them sort of is out of sync or doesn't work, you'll resent the fact that you paid a premium price for it. And getting the best instructors and managing the instructors and the schedules is really complex. I mean, we might have 6,000 classes a month, for example, and we'll have to find cover for 1,500 because life happens, but the show always has to go on. So if you then multiply that by however many X's for the size of Soul Cycle, it becomes really, really challenging. I think I never want to say anything bad about Soul Cycle because they in many respects paved the way for a completely new sector in the industry. So, we owe them everything in many respects. But I think prior to COVID, they might recognize themselves that they grew very, very quickly, and sustaining the quality whilst having a really fast-paced growth is always going to be the challenge. And my biggest concern is around sort of size. Can you get to a size where you no longer have that personal touch with the business? You can't create the culture that sort of defined the business in the early stages, and do you become sort of the corporate entity rather than a scrappy underdog, and therefore lose favor of your customer base as well? So there's a fine there's a moment where you're too big. I don't know exactly when that is, but one of the reasons why we design all our clubs differently is hopefully that they continue to kind of surprise and delight the customer. It extends our brand sort of longevity, if you like, and hopefully we're not something that's cool at a moment, but then becomes out of fashion. It might be more sustained that way.
Are you looking for these timeless ideas? Because I guess with the reformer, that's your kind of, your opposite to what's going on in here. So are you trying to find sort of concepts that are fairly timeless and then, not necessarily being about a piece of equipment or a specific way of putting that together, would you say?
Yeah, I think I'd probably say complementary more, because if you just reshape, for example, is hard. I mean, anyone who's done it knows it's quite difficult, and a lot of people are a bit sore the next day. And so asking people to come sort of 2, 3, 4 times a week can be quite challenging. Whereas, for example, I might do a ride class on a weekend with my girlfriend for a kind of maybe a different thing, just because we like to do it together and it's more fun, and it might be less sort of taxing on the knees. You and I have to think about that these days. And whereas reformer as well is incredibly complementary. I've always thought if you do reformer and reshape regularly, you're going to be in incredible shape and balance as well. So I like to think of the concepts as complementary, but they have different aspects. Ride is a great workout, but it's also an experience. And one thing when we were talking about the success of Ride, our club in Victoria, I think, was a step forward. It's such a show. It's 80 bikes, multiple tiers, like a theatre with the gods, if you like, not just podiums. It's just one hell of an experience, and I think that's where Ride has to be, to compete. We will be looking to improve all of our Ride studios over time, but it's costly to get that level of experience. But in my view, Ride has to be theatrical for it to really be get that traction with the customers.
Does that work when it comes to sort of numbers? Like, have you found that Victoria experience compared to where you've got everywhere else, is that drawing people to it just because of what you've created? Yeah,
I mean, Victoria is a club where people travel to. I know that anecdotally and statistically. When we add events and we have live music, we have saxophonists, fire breathers, all that sort of stuff. I mean, it creates conversations, and I think our marketing going forward is going to be more about sort of marketing by referral from creating conversations with our customers. So we sort of rejected the desire to put on glossy billboards now at huge expense. We're saying that we want to double down in events and sort of marketing led by referrals.
Would you say that there is an evolution to this event style? So you've got your regular, I'm going to go 2 or 3 times a week, but there's also an opportunity that if I'm interested in something once a month, I'm going to travel for 45 minutes and I'm going to go and be part of something that is a little bit different to regular.
Yeah, I mean, so anyone who's in this industry, they obviously want to create success, and hopefully maybe wealth is a byproduct of that. But I'm sure the vast majority are in it because they actually believe in it. Not only can your life be expanded, but your healthy life, if you like, the way you live, can be vastly improved. But we also know that exercise is difficult, especially when the weather's like this and you've got the opportunity to turn the heating up, have a glass of red wine and watch your favourite show on TV. Being motivated to get outside and run or even go to a gym, having that motivation can be a challenge. So I think you've got to give reasons for people to do something that they don't always want to do. Nobody's ever regretted a workout, but that moment prior to the workout is often riddled with anxiety or procrastination, or can I find an excuse not to do it? And that's, I think, normal. We shouldn't punish ourselves for it. But if I can put on an event where we're going to have a rapper in the class, or live music, or dancers, or fire breathers, whatever it is, however ridiculous it may be, if it's a reason to go, but also a reason to invite a friend, because we know that will be a much more enjoyable experience, and yeah, we should give them the reasons, because if we believe the goal is to get people active, we need to, bridge that gap between, oh, I'm not sure if I want to go to a class, to let's call a friend and book in that class.
How do you position it from a fitness perspective? I was looking on when I came up this morning at some of your social media stuff, and even I remember in the early days, you were the first people I remember to be giving champagne, and that was almost like this big pull. Like, are you selling fitness, or are you selling this lifestyle which is about having fun, staying healthy?
Yeah, I think when we first met, Giles and I drank too much, and we were thinking that everyone else wanted to do the same as well. And to some extent, in those days, that was still sort of the culture. One thing I've seen massively is, and I see it with my own team and also now my friends, is there is a big shift away from sort of the boozing culture that I remember in banking and that sort of thing. It's very sad
now you're
times.
showing your age now.
Yeah. And doing a class and having a juice or protein shake afterwards is now more interesting social way of meeting up than necessarily just going to the local pub on a Tuesday night and sharing stories. And that's not a bad thing. I think our customers are becoming so much more informed on diet, nutrition, sleep, supplements. Everybody's plugged into these wonderful podcasts now where they get all this information. There's no excuse these days to not know something. It's about your lack of curiosity, I guess, if you're not willing to learn. But now everybody has that information on the end of their fingertips. So I think we've got, our marketing's gone from a shift of sort of detox and work out hard, play hard, to a bit more, okay, actually, there's so much knowledge here. Let's learn how to sleep better. I mean, I was from sort of the generation of sleep is for wimps, if you like, and now I'm doing everything possible to try and get a good night's sleep. The setup I've got is just ridiculous, but I'm much better for it. I turned 40 this year, and I mean, you're a lot older than me, so you'll know this.
Oh, thanks.
But things change. The way we react to a night out or a lack of sleep. I mean, I find if I haven't had a good night's sleep, I lose 30% more of my sort of cognitive. You see, I've obviously didn't sleep well last night. You know what I'm trying to say. So our customers want this information. I think we need to take part in that now and be a little bit maybe less flippant with the negative effects of not trying to live more healthily.
How are you connecting with your audience? Because I've noticed it, not quite as much as you, because we are very similar in age almost, but there's definitely a difference between a lot of the age of the people that are coming in here and both of us. Yeah. And as you gave a great example of where you sort of, you think about your business in terms of things that resonate with us, but they're a totally different generation. Yeah. How are you staying relevant and ensuring that there's that connection between the way you're thinking as a business leader and the people that you want to bring into your locations?
Yeah, I mean, I remember reading this book by Jimmy Carr recently. It's called Before and Laughter, and it's almost like a self-help book, and which is, you might think is bizarre from a comedian like Jimmy Carr, but it's actually very, very good. And he was talking about how if you're at a Christmas dinner and you've got your granddad, giving his views on the world, and maybe your 16-year-old little brother giving his views on the world, if you're not sure where to side, you're probably better off siding with the 16-year-old because that's a more progressive outlook going forward. So I think we should always take inspiration from sort of the younger people coming through. They're not always right, so get their enthusiasm and their view on progression with a bit more wisdom and experience, and you meet in a nice place. But I think we want to try to stay relevant, but not always be led. We want to sort of lead at the same time, and you're going to make mistakes, but hopefully if you do that in an honest and authentic way, it's forgivable. So we just try our best, really.
Certainly through the pandemic, it's been very easy to actually get things wrong. I know from sort of before those times, you were leading with a very progressive, inclusive messaging from your marketing, but I've seen many people that have just slightly sided or supported an idea, and it's been disastrous for the business. Yeah. How do you get that right so that you're certainly playing and supporting some of these ideas, but being careful not to do something that could jeopardize a multi-million-pound business?
Oh God, that is a really tough one. We try, we have lots of debates internally. Like, I don't believe in sort of pandering or patronizing a cause just for the sake of saying, we stand by something. We've had long conversations about what we stand for, and I sort of said, look, if it's just an Instagram post, you're not really standing for something. How are we going to include that in what we're doing as a brand, what charities we work for, what we're doing internally for our culture. So try to be as sort of balanced as possible on that. I think one conversation we've had recently is I think actually we're going to do less of it in a way, not because there are things we don't believe in, but just I'm feeling as a customer of many businesses that we're talking too much about things, and a lot of people come to fitness or classes, especially for escape. We have so much access to information that is often driven by a model where the more negative the information, the more likely we are to click through in it. That, quite frankly, I feel like the world is like a busy WhatsApp group that you just want to exit at times, and so I'm saying to our team now, look, we're not departing from our values, but at the same time, I don't think our values need to be shoved down people's throats at every opportunity. We are a gym. We want to get people fit and live longer and better lives, and that should take up 90% of our messaging. And where there's a point where we feel we need to remind people where we stand on something, we should. But there are also things that I feel we should avoid. Things. I know a lot of people are putting up posts around what's happening in Israel and Gaza. I said I want to stay out of this. There's too much anger on both sides, and also in a conflict where there are some horrible things happening. I also don't want some idiots misreading what we would say and attacking some of our staff. So there are times where I say I'm not going to get involved in something purely because I do not want any of our team or customers to end up getting the rough end of the stick because of it. So it's a balance. Everybody will pick their way. I hope we do a relatively good job of it. We will make mistakes, and when we make mistakes, people tell us. But also, you sometimes have to measure the one person being very loud on the comment section versus the overall feeling. Because when people agree, they don't often write to you saying, "I agree, well done." It's often just the people who disagree who are very loud.
I guess with fitness as well, it is very inclusive. When I've done your classes before, and you have all kinds of different people, young and old, and it's the one thing I suppose that brings people together, even at fitness events that we've been to for many years. Is there is a common bond amongst all those people that I suppose joins as opposed to divides, and sometimes just by having an opinion on those things can automatically create a separation between people that are coming together just to do something they enjoy. Can't it?
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think everybody, and I'm not against what's happened over the last couple of years at all. I think there's been a huge amount of progress. I mean, if you take everything from the Me Too movement, I mean, that we've seen remarkable progress. Probably still not enough, but the way people act and the way they behave and the way they're showing more respect to one another, that's been fantastic. So there's a lot of great stuff that comes from social media's ability to amplify an issue and to get the point across and to be agency of change. I just also think that's going to happen regardless of us. We need to sometimes remind ourselves of the basics that we're trying to get people to enjoy a workout. It's kind of really simple. We want them to enjoy it with all the people around them. And this should be an environment which is one of the most positive experiences you can have with any type of corporation. You should be welcomed at the door. You should be able to see like-minded people who've got similar goals for a better life, a more enjoyable life, a life where they can move better, breathe better, exist better, and have a better positive outlook because their mental health is better, and do it with great instructors in a fun environment with music, lighting, everything to get the endorphins going. It should be just a non-stop positive journey. So why sort of deflect from that in many respects? We should be focused on that, as the whole sector should be. And I think if we try to constantly prove that we're a good people, we lose track of the service that we are here to provide. at the end of the day, it will always come down to authenticity, and there'll be some founders or leaders who are authentically on one side of the fence versus another, and it's up to them what they want to do. But we've gone through a journey of being very outspoken about a lot of things. I think people know where we stand as a brand, but I have sort of been saying to the marketing team, I want to focus on what we are really as much as possible.
Yeah. What are your experiences been with trainers? Because this is a model that really, outside of the beautiful environment, is really sort of succeeding or failing on the strength of the trainers. And from many of the people I've spoke to, coming back after the pandemic, it's been difficult to get great people and to keep great people, and people have been traveling and moving around. How have you found that experience for your business?
Well, we did one thing in the pandemic, which I think has paid huge dividends, and that was when the government were talking about the furlough scheme. It took them a number of weeks before they reacted to the vast amount of freelancers in this country. And I can't remember the exact numbers, but essentially we gave close to, I think, £200,000 out to our instructors at the time. We said, well, if the government's not stepping in, we will, because they were truly looking at a very precarious position financially. There was no support, no work. And it was, I guess, a handout in a sense, but it was also saying, look, we're going to be with you in the tough times. Nobody knew how life was going to play out. I mean, that £200,000 arguably could have come in use, a little bit later on when things got extended, all the rest of it. But I'll never regret it. It was the right thing to do. And as a result, I mean, we now have, I guess, close to 200 instructors in central London. And in the last 3 years, maybe 7 leave. And that might be because they've moved abroad. I can only think of 1 or 2 examples where it's been on our terms, not mutual or them leaving. So I think we've got a great culture within our fitness team. One thing's for sure is culture is, you don't just bank it and it stays forever. You've got to keep working on it. This year has been quite distracting with various sort of resets of where we are as a business, but. I think overall we treat them well. They have lots of opportunity within the business as well because there's multiple disciplines, and I think they know when they've needed help, we've been there. So our experience has been very good with the instructors, but I never want to count my chickens because. That can change. The instructors are freelancers, and that's the one thing I hate about our model, quite frankly, because the people who are that major interaction with the customers are freelancers. But that kind of has to exist because of the nature of the model. But I think as much as they can, they feel they are sort of rebels and part of the team.
How do you continue to develop and maintain that high standard from a training perspective? Because you're still a relatively small business, so you can't put like a big academy in place to do all that stuff.
Yeah, well, we I mean, literally just today, it's funny you said that, we've created our own sort of training hub for Reformer. So we've got a sort of a unit in East London where they've got like 10 beds, and we can do more training and development there. I think you have to obviously continue to train, develop, inspect, and I never want to be that sort of business where there's a threat that will remove the underperformers, but at the same time, there is an implicit expectation that the standard has to be met. Now, there are different tiers within our instructor levels, and that might be based on how long you've been being an instructor or various qualifications, what have you. But in my mind, as a customer, you should not notice the difference in tiers. You pass SAS selection, you are a member of the SAS. That's how it should feel. But the SAS or a successful bank or any type of business will always look at the bottom sort of 10% and say, what are we doing about that? We at the moment are still growing. And we seem to be in a great position where we have lots of people wanting to work for us, which helps keep everybody honest. So I think it's that whole balance of, look, you know what our expectations are. There's lots of people who want to have this job, and we're going to support and develop you. And if you put all that together, I think it keeps everyone honest and hardworking.
As part of your ability to attract good talent, a lot to do with what you've done, what you're doing as a brand. Are those two sort of working together?
I think it's brand, but it's also its scale. Now there are opportunities for people sort of across London to work in the clubs that they want to on their way to home, from home, cover for different experiences, different concepts as well. So I think the opportunity for, solid work, solid pay, and prospects is probably better with us by definition of our size than maybe some of our competitors. It's not to say our competitors aren't as good. There's some fantastic competitors, and I'm sure there's lots of demand for work there. But I think there's a practical edge on size now, which resonates with instructors.
How do you see the changes of the people coming into the city like London? The working patterns have clearly been affected since before and post-pandemic. How do you see that affecting your model? Like, are you still been able to figure out and almost like become a city club, or do you think that you may need to adjust and go out to some of the bigger areas outside of main cities?
Yeah, so I've always been fairly optimistic that people will return to work, and I think we're now seeing that. It was ironic when I think Zoom announced that they wanted people to come back in the office. That was a bit of a marker in the sand, I think. But so we are seeing people come back. I think we were for a long time tracking our attendance versus TfL attendance. And a lot of the time we were ahead of that, which I thought was pleasing. I don't know, I've not checked it recently, but I think TfL is almost back to pre-COVID levels. The big change that we've seen is on Fridays,
right?
Because people, it's gone from work from home to having a longer weekend basically, and so a lot of people are not in the office on Fridays. So Fridays is like quantum of about 15% different to pre-COVID levels, which is quite a lot in a business like ours. But weirdly, also Tuesdays are much higher than they were before. So there's the variations slightly offset themselves. But I've always been optimistic about the return to work, because capital cities have thrived for millennia. They don't just dissolve. There's instances like San Francisco, I think, which are having a lot of problems, but that's not just a COVID-related problem.
And New York as well, from what I hear, seems to have this sort of Tuesday to Thursday.
Sure. People
come in a little bit later, leave a bit earlier, and still seem to be struggling a little bit. But
but cities reinvent themselves. All of a sudden there'll be new developments that are catering for different markets, new incentives for people to come into work on various days. So I'm sort of optimistic that these things kind of figure themselves out, and I think providing we are near the best transport hubs, that's always where we do better. So
there's a lot of big franchises now that are boutique franchises, and you mentioned earlier about the ability to. You're talking about culture and staying in touch with what's going on. How do you feel about can you get to a size where you're almost too big to have the same approach on a boutique business, or can you figure out ways
in terms of franchising?
Well, in terms of franchising, or if you just continue to open lots of locations, is there a point where you come a little bit disconnected from it?
Yes and no. That connection is a cultural, and I think led by sort of the leader connection. If the leaders of your business, let's say abroad, don't understand how important the detail is, then the standards will drop very, very quickly. Just all those experiences from the moment you enter the club to leave have to be on point. And I'm not suggesting I get them or we get them perfectly on point, but we're trying our best. I think the challenge with franchising or just growth for growth's sake is is you've got to be really in the weeds of this business. You've got to really be understanding sort of what the customer's doing, what your team is doing, to continually evolve it. And that's more difficult if you are growing at a hugely fast pace, or you've got maybe slightly disinterested franchise partners. You know, I'm always a little bit conflicted around franchising this model, because I understand acutely that, you know, franchising a Subway sandwich franchise has its huge strengths and benefits, where it's more process driven, where it's more emotion and entertainment and, you know, people led. That's much harder to build just processes that are rock solid, even when the management aren't looking so deeply. So. Yeah, we're still learning and figuring that out.
Coming up next.
It's easier to be negative than it is to be optimistic these days. So I'll always try and be optimistic.
Your dad's been through a lot of these ups and downs. Do you chat to him, and do you know what he thinks about the situation?
One thing for sure is during times of crisis, go and speak to someone who's older. Because they've weathered the storm. If you're an optimist, you kind of really buy into the fact that we can solve most things, and the only thing that is the end of the world is the end of the world.
Have you decided what you'll do with the international side? Will you do it yourself? Because is it right? Is it a franchise in the Middle East, in Dubai?
Yeah, not in Dubai. Dubai is wholly owned, so is Australia. And we've got a very small franchise business in Saudi and Israel, both of which have had their challenges, you know, because they both started just before COVID, and now obviously Israel is having a tremendous challenge. So they haven't necessarily been the best test cases in terms of what could be done there. But I think it remains at the moment that our franchise policy as such would be to look to franchise where we wouldn't typically deploy capital by ourselves. But at the same time, that kind of allows it to be anywhere versus Dubai, Australia and UK, because I think we've now got the flags in the sand, if you like, in some international locations, but really you need to grow in those existing ones before now going elsewhere, because whenever you take a model overseas, it's always going to suck resources from the core, because, you know, introducing a new brand, new concept to a new market just costs a lot in terms of working capital losses, head office costs. So now we've got those fledgling businesses in those geographies. We need to double down on those, grow them before looking to expand elsewhere. So there will always be, you know, exciting opportunities with franchises, and it's always quite alluring to both investors and founders, because it feels like free money, but there's no free money. You know, it all takes work and effort.
How do you feel about that? Because I guess you see a lot of these chains expanding, and sometimes when you think they're in one country or one city, and then they're suddenly dropping in somewhere totally different. And I can appreciate what you've said, because even just some basic marketing in a new place is you have to do everything almost like double. So you're doubling your costs in effect. Have you learned anything? Because you've been involved in this for you've had a number of models that you've been involved in yourselves. Have you evolved your thinking from a strategic perspective in terms of how to maximize the footprint that you've got in terms of improving profitability and building a solid business?
So if we look back, so even 4 years ago, so pre-COVID, there were lofty valuations being given for businesses that were essentially ubiquitous, could travel globally, and as long as you had your outposts established, and you proved that in your home country, let's say, the model was successful, you could get lofty valuations on the potential of those outposts based on it being a ubiquitous product. Everybody exercises, so why couldn't you replicate those successes that you had in your home territory elsewhere? And the more flag posts you had, the higher your potential valuation could be. Since COVID, I think assets have been repriced globally. How many unicorns have we seen have their value halved in the last 12 months? You know, everyone is looking at profits, not just this promise of profits. And so when we look now, you know, investor sentiment is, I'm not going to give you any upside for loss-making foreign outposts, because there's always a risk element now, and we're not building in these lofty valuations for those sort of things. So in order to get those profitable, you need to grow them, because with the cost of a head office, even if your first club is wildly profitable, net you're probably going to be break even. So you need to get to 2, 3, 4 clubs to really show the earnings of that sort of outpost. But the investor sentiment since COVID has been unforgiving in that you need to now be making profit. So I think knowing what I know now, if I was to do everything again, I would have waited to go abroad much longer. I would have built more critical mass in London, become the dominant player in London, and then start moving abroad with larger capital to open 3 or 4 clubs at the same time. And I think third space have been exceptionally good in not being drawn overseas too quickly. They will come in the next few years. They will be the dominant premium player in London, and with investors probably willing to throw lots of money at them to go and establish themselves in other major conurbations globally. But they would have weakened their position financially if they had done that too soon. So I think that would be something I would have done differently.
How is the investment market? Like, I guess a lot of people have had to raise money just to deal with their current business and pay off debt. Are people still looking at your sector, the boutique sector, favourably still, or is it pretty difficult out there to get support?
Yeah, I look, these days things change almost like a month-to-month basis. We were looking to raise money in January of this year, and we had made a small loss last year, and at the time I was telling them what we were going to make this year, and no one believed me. And I understand why. There just wasn't enough proof in the pudding. Was the market going to come back? We had cost of living crisis, interest rates going up, tube strikes, unions acting, wars, across the world. So there wasn't a huge amount of consumer confidence or investor confidence. I'm pleased to say everything I said was going to happen in January is going to happen now that we're in sort of month 11. But I also have I'm not upset by the fact that they didn't really believe me. It's very hard to believe people when you're coming out of something that was so unquantifiable in terms of how long-lasting the effects were going to be. So I think as businesses prove what they were going to say, investor confidence changes. But if I look back, if I think now, our legacy sort of debts, if you like, with landlords and that sort of thing, we will finally be free of all of those agreements in March 2026.
Wow.
So the hangover, and I think we've been quite good with doing agreements with landlords. So, I say that publicly because I'm sure lots of people will be doing better than that. A lot of people would be doing worse than that. But what everyone's forgotten is how devastating the effects of COVID were for businesses accruing legacy debts and problems that will take many, many years to unravel. And so the government sort of moved on, and I think they've done a great job, fine. But there's been, I think, torment and torture for a lot of businesses over a long period of time, which has been upsetting from my perspective because anyone who's had to go through going bust has probably been absolutely awful. But equally, those who just want to focus on delivering great concepts and improving the market, developing and pioneering new things, are still somewhat being dragged by the legacy of COVID. When the government gave out money in terms of furlough and COVID loans, it was still loans. There was no free tap, if you like. And when we were forced to close, the landlords still expected to be paid. So it's been tough out there.
If you had to take your perspective and give an assessment on where you think the industry is in general, would you say that it's still fairly suppressed because even though memberships may be back up again and things are improving, that there's a lot of people have still got several years just to catch up for where they were, which is going to affect investment and expansion of what seems to be a lot of demand for fitness, but then the fulfillment of that, is obviously a little bit slower than what it's been historically.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at a sector, like I said, like every sector, it's essentially being repriced and reshaped. And I think that what really frustrates me is during COVID, the government should have been speaking every single briefing about getting people fit, because having a robust immune system and good physical fitness was probably the best antidote to a health disease, at the time. So we should have been expanding the industry, not allowing it to shrink. Both the legacy of COVID loans, but also, the quite critical costs that came through utilities has meant that I think the sector has overall shrunk, and I think it will continue to shrink. There'll be lots of chains giving up their unprofitable clubs or disappearing completely. It's like, you don't suddenly go from a happy marriage to a divorce. It takes time to get there, and so does sort of, going out of business. It takes time, and then it suddenly happens. And I think, in many respects, we're still at the beginning of that process for a lot of businesses. So I think if you look at the industry in 18, 24 months, it will be smaller. It will be more focused, though. It would have learned a lot of the lessons from a very difficult path, and then I think you'll see a flood of money and a new growth phase. We always get sort of very focused on the crisis that we're in. But as I said to you earlier, by definition, the existing crisis is worse than the previous one because you survived the previous one. But if you look back on a 20, 30 or 40 year view, there are just peaks and troughs, but overall the chart of progress goes from here to here. So life continues to get better for almost everybody on a macro view. Health system, knowledge, education, less wars, believe it or not, less suicides, less deaths, less prison population. Everything gets better over a long period of time. So I'm almost ever the optimist. And I think, as Jamie Dimon said, a recession is just something that happens every 7 years. Well, if you think we've gone through 3 years of almost the worst economic circumstances, well, I'm there sitting here thinking, well, the next 5 years I think will be great. And, it's easier to be negative than it is to be optimistic these days. So I'll always try and be optimistic.
Your dad's been through a lot of these ups and downs. Do you chat to him, and do you know what he thinks about the situation?
Yeah, I mean, one thing for sure is during times of crisis, go and speak to someone who's older, because they've weathered the storms. And like I said, if you're an optimist, you kind of really buy into the fact that we can solve most things, and the only thing that is the end of the world is the end of the world. We always get caught up in that, why me? But why not? Shit happens. It's how you respond to it that I think is really critical. And having a long view, I think, tends to be better for your sanity, but also probably more realistic than reacting to the short-term crises. So I think, a bit of wisdom, a bit of grey hair says, life goes on. You will get through this, but it doesn't mean it's easy.
How have you dealt with it personally? Has it been tough for James?
Yeah, it has actually. There are moments over the last few years where I, got very sort of emotional and upset, thinking that sort of what we dreamt was going to be taken away from us for no reason, no fault of our own, and that's why I get very, very sad thinking about the people that did happen to. In the end, we had supportive investors and supportive customers, which gave us essentially a lifeline. But it's certainly not been easy. I think I certainly was someone who took things too personally. And my lesson from this is to learn from that, to not take things personally, to be a little bit more long-term in my perspective, work with the partners that I've got. I think I probably, there are moments where I had a few rows with people, which I regret now. So I think it's been difficult personally as well. There was a lot of risk. I had personal guarantees out there for all sorts of things, as you do when you're an optimistic entrepreneur. You don't mind risking the house because what could possibly go wrong? But it turns out things can. But I think I've matured during that process. But it's left a bit of scar tissue. But I think that's sort of how we grow. It's how you know who you are. So I think overall, those who sort of come out of it will come out of it in better shape, at least personally, in terms of their makeup, if not necessarily financially.
In the 6 years since we've had the last interview, technology's just changed almost like, you can't imagine like what's available now with AI and some of the progress that's been made on that side and what that means to business, all kinds of business. How do you see things like AI, blockchain, machine learning, some of these new innovations that are fairly recent impacting where your business is today, if at all?
God, I am probably the worst person in the world to talk about this. I still need help with email and various things. So AI, I don't think is going to lead to mass unemployment in the way people fear. I think it's going to, the first sort of couple of years will allow people to do vastly a greater number of tasks than they would normally be able to. Just from a basic example, if I was to do a job spec for a position, that might take me 40 minutes to an hour to get right. You tap into ChatGPT, give me a job spec for a manager at 1Rebel. It's amazing how bloody accurate it is. Fantastic in 30 seconds. So I think it will help us do tasks, which will mean we're more effective and more productive. I was going to say the great thing about this industry is there's unlikely to be a pill that's going to make you in great shape, and then we've got Ozempic or whatever coming through. But I think there's so much more to fitness than just looking great. I've never had a six-pack. That's never been my desire. But I have all the information that can get me that. I could eat better. I could drink less. I could train in different ways. Nobody can say they don't have the information. But there's not always the desire to just be perfect. Fitness can do so much more than just this illusion of perfection, which often comes at a much greater cost than people think. It can be fun. It can be great for your mental health. It can be great for, pushing off disease and problems in the future. And that needs a lot of things to work in tandem to replace it then. And so I think it's unlikely in my lifetime there will be a replacement product for the benefits and the experience you get from our sector. So could Ozempic actually be something that makes people want to exercise more?
I've heard actually, you say that, I got a paper that it does make people want to train more, and the impacts are greater if you combine it with exercise.
Well, and this thing, so it could be a great thing for the industry. I mean, when I speak to people and say, look, why haven't you gone to 1Rebel? A lot of people will say, well, I want to sort of get fit before doing fitness. And it's not just 1Rebel, that might be a Pure Gym or Fitness First or whatever. And that's because there's lots of insecurity and vanity at play in the decision to just do fitness or do fitness publicly. But if it means that there's a lot of people who weren't training who now feel confident to train, that's a fantastic thing. So, I don't think necessarily as threats to this sector. I think there are so many things that can be complementary. We are a sector that's very, very hard to replace or leave redundant or defunct. But we just have to keep evolving and keep listening and trying to do the best we can.
Have you seen a change in the style or the types of people that come in to your facility post-pandemic? Like, you mentioned about people that feel as though they need to get fit before they come in here. Are you recognizing people that have realized that fitness is now important, but the way they interact and the environment that they feel comfortable in, there's a bit of getting used to that on both sides?
So we've not seen almost any change. A customer profile is growing. Women tend to be sort of first movers, I think, in fitness, especially group fitness, and men sort of come along. And we're seeing many more men now in reformer and ride sessions than there were maybe 6 years ago. But the biggest change I'm seeing is in the conversations of the customers and our staff. People are learning, like I said, a lot more about sleep, nutrition, fasting, supplements, and they're enjoying sharing that knowledge as well, and which I think is only a fantastic thing. Because I remember back in the days of sort of the previous business, we had a club next to a McDonald's, and you'd see sometimes people doing a session and getting a burger because they thought they were getting protein. And now we're so much more knowledgeable about ultra processed foods being just a category killer in many respects. How sleep is so useful to all of your progress. So I think we are seeing just a much more informed customer who is not afraid also to have more variety in their life.
Right. And does the fact that they are more informed, do they demand more? Because I guess they've through the pandemic, there weren't gyms and they had access to so much information. They could figure out what was relevant to them. They understood what good and bad looked like. So do you feel that in some ways the bar's raised from what the consumer's expectations are?
Yeah, I do. And we're trying to work out how to take part in those conversations more. Should we write more about those various topics? And I think what we will start to do is point people in the direction of the sources of knowledge. I think if you try and be too many things, you lose the authority on those things. So I think we want to say, look, we'll be on the authority in what we're doing in these four walls. But if I've listened to a great podcast from a longevity expert, well, yeah, we'll put in an email, check out this podcast, rather than try and say what they're saying and be your authority on that, because there's still also a lot of science out there that's being questioned or being evolved, but I feel like people should spend less time sort of questioning things, more time trying things and seeing what works for them, because everybody's different.
You've been fairly good at understanding or predicting how to disrupt things. What are you looking at the moment as it relates to the fitness space in terms of where you think the next changes are likely to come, whether that's in terms of equipment, the design of spaces, the programs? Are there any things that you're keeping an eye on to say, okay, this is the next thing that may come and shake things up a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I'm awful at sort of giving away the things that we're about to do, so I'm going to try not to do that. But I do think, we are becoming more knowledgeable about sort of the therapies and wellness sort of opportunities beyond just hardcore sort of fitness that can be very complementary to everything you're doing. I mean, we don't have saunas in our clubs. I'm not sure if we ever will, but some of the science around how regular saunas can lessen your likelihood for dementia or Alzheimer's is becoming now really rock solid, which I thankfully don't have that I know of anyway in my family. But I mean, that is something that would make me think to go to a sauna really regularly. So I think as the science becomes more rock solid on some of these things, more companies in our sector will start to look to offer those things. I think people are starting to think about longevity in a much more serious way. You spend the first sort of 20, 30 years maybe abusing yourself a little bit too much, but then you soon start realizing you want to be on this planet for a bit longer. And so I think the industry is going to start looking more to how we can react to people's desire to have a much longer and better life. I had some blood tests not so long ago. I don't think I was treating myself particularly well during the stresses and strains of sort of COVID and that sort of thing. And it was a bit shocking to me. I've been in this industry for a long, long time, but there are things I had to definitely change. And the funniest thing is I just employed what's all out there in terms of knowledge, and within 45 days, I had reduced certain markers by like 40%. Wow. But who takes a blood test? Very few people do it. So I would encourage anyone who's turned 40 to do it for 100%. I learned a lot from it, and will be making changes that will be with me for a long, long time. But what's the fitness industry doing to really talk about this? So I can see us looking more as a sector around preventative things and a focus on sort of longevity beyond just come in and do a 45-minute session and go. And I think that's a great thing. It'd be a good thing.
I've seen Lifetime now are combining the semaglutide therapy with their fitness club. Do you see having a form of medical with like studios and combining those two?
So yes, but I can't work out the financial model yet, and so that there will be either I'm wrong or there'll be a time where you see it as like a loss leader, and that's a financial model in itself. You just do it even if it's going to lose money, or somebody works it out smarter than me, but having medical professionals on site in your business, unless you've got a huge scale, is a challenging one to do. I've not quite figured it out yet, but yeah, I think.
Well, if you look at how much or how little they're getting paid on the NHS, maybe there are quite a few people there that.
Yeah, and it might be that it's collaborations. It might be there's a minimal viable product where once a month you have someone who comes in and do this sort of stuff. I just think it's like I was listening the other day about how the booze industry, and it's always quite cynical when it's sort of booze or cigarettes, right? But when they look to expand their market, they're recognizing that women weren't drinking as much as men, so they started to essentially sort of create more pink products, if you like, where everything was a pink gin or a rosé or a beer with ice, and they were deliberately trying to expand their market by getting more women into drinking. That's got. I'm not saying that's a shining light at all. It's a bad thing in some respects. But if you think about our sector, and you think, okay, well, 80% of my business is 25 to 35-year-olds. Well, obviously, there's a realistic business proposition opportunity if I have more of the market, if I'm getting 45, 55, 65-year-olds. So why not let's be in tune with what those people are wanting as well. And I think if I look back over the last 30 years, 60-year-olds were suddenly sort of realizing, okay, I've got to think of longevity. Then in 50-year-olds, now it's 40-year-olds, and I think in the next 10 years, there'll be 35-year-olds planning for the next 50, 60 years of their life. So that I guess would be a trend that I would see, but that's a very long-term trend. I don't expect the market to be moving rapidly in that direction, but it's what we're thinking of.
So where are you hoping that 1Rebel will be in the next 2 to 3 years, outside of, hugely profitable, but is there any other sort of strategic goals that you guys have got that you're able to share?
Yeah, I think we want to continue to premiumize the business. We want to lean into some of those aspects that I've just been speaking about for the last couple of minutes. We want to grow the international business in the geographies that we are in. I think our shareholders would like to see sort of an exit in 2 to 3 years. And I think, you're going to have to sort of march me out of this business for me to not be involved in it. So as long as I'm still required, I think the next step after that sort of exit point for those shareholders would be to maybe look for longer term, more patient capital with sort of maybe deeper pockets so that we could, go on the sort of the next phase of our sort of ambitions, which I think is sort of be bigger, bolder, better.
Would you like to be part of that, or are you sort of thinking you want to go and climb some more mountains?
No, I don't know what else I would do, so I love it, and I think what gets me into work every day, especially is, and I'm not just saying this to be cliched, but it's the team. I've got an absolutely wonderful team of really, really good-hearted people who are well-intentioned and hard-working, and it's a joy to be with. So to the extent that I'm still required, I would like to, you have to sometimes match your ambitions with your shareholders' desires. And I think the shareholders now, having gone through an extended sort of investment period through COVID, would like to see a good exit and return. I think I've got to deliver that over the next couple of years, and then maybe new shareholders could align with some of the maybe more loftier goals I would have over a 10, 15, 20-year period, and let me go on the journey with them for that. But they might also have other plans, so who knows.
So our final question then, James. Escape Your Limits is about escaping what you believed is impossible and gone on to make possible. What would be a more recent example of you escaping your own personal limits?
Oh, God. Escaping my own personal limits. I think the last few years have been really tough. I think they took sort of a toll on me to some extent. But I think the thing that I sort of take away is that it is so much better just to be optimistic and to hang in there. And I think when I said earlier about you shouldn't take things too personally, when any founder or entrepreneur is going through a tough time, they do believe the responsibility is 100% on them. And to some extent it is, but there is more to life as well. And I think I neglected some friendships along the last few years. And eventually, whether it's with or without me, the problems in business or the world get resolved. But it's been a regret that I didn't service those relationships as much as I served maybe an imaginary problem in my head. And I think in the last couple of months, I've gone back to make amends or to reestablish those friendships. And it's just a great reminder that real friends are there with you no matter what. Businesses will come and go. You do your best. As long as you can say you're doing your best and believe it, the love of those that are meaningful and around you is far more important than anything else. So I think the lesson for me is to double down in those relationships. They will live a lot longer than anything else.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, James. Appreciate it.
Thanks for your time. Cheers.